Thanks very much. And are we good to go on the taping business? Great. All right. Thanks so much. So I want to thank very much Professors Gordon and Damiano for having me here this evening, and the university, and my esteemed co-panelists. I'm anxious to hear from them too. You all who are in school now but going to graduate and seek jobs soon, have this unenviable situation of entering an economy that's really soft right now. I certainly hope it gets better by the time you finish, but a lot of people think it's not going to get very soft. I want to argue to you tonight that getting economic development policy right, getting tax policy right, getting job creation right is the most important thing you need to have your public officials do. You especially need them to do, because some people are already writing your generation off. They're already writing articles, like recently appeared in the Atlantic, talking about how you're going to not become attached to the workforce. You're not going to get used to working. Because of the rates of unemployment are going to be so high for so many years as you enter the labor market, you're going to suffer long-term declines in your standard of living, which will persist for the rest of your working life. I mean, if you don't want those outcomes to happen, we need to get economic development right. We need to get tax policy and job creation right for you. I can't say enough about how self-interested you should be in this issue about getting it right and paying attention to how public officials are spending taxpayer money in the name of benefiting you and your long-term standard of living. I don't know about you. For instance, my brother-in-law is a dislocated worker. How many people in this room have a family member or extended family member who is a dislocated worker or has been in this recession? How many people? That's a lot of people. Yeah, and this is the deepest recession we've had since the Great Recession, the Great Depression. They call it the Great Recession. Record durations of unemployment, greater shares of workers dislocated for longer periods of time than any time since that series of records began being kept right after World War II. So the stakes are high to get it right. So Good Jobs First is a nonprofit group. As mentioned, we do a lot of work we publish, we train, we agitate. This is a touchy subject. It's freighted with some hot rhetoric from the left and right. You hear different terms applied to what I'm going to talk about. The polite term is business incentives. The loaded term is corporate welfare. I call them economic development subsidies. But whatever you want to call them, Iowa, like the average state, has about 3 dozen of them, and they apply to every kind of fee or tax that a company normally would pay to help pay for their share of public services. And it's not unusual for deals to be worth more than $100,000 per job. That's been true in many states for many years. It's not unusual for companies to pay no income tax for years on new deals, no property tax for years on new deals. You're not the only state that does that. Altogether, they add up, we estimate, all states and cities spend about $60 billion a year in either grants and loans and discounts or in foregone revenue, so-called tax expenditures. Where we're coming from is that's a lot of money. $60 billion is a lot of money. It could do a lot of good if we tightened it up, so to speak. It could actually create good jobs. It could reduce poverty. It could curb sprawl and help reduce global warming. It could do a lot for small business development. But the trouble is, in many cases, the rules of the programs have strayed from their facial good intentions, and they aren't doing these things. And I'll try to explain why that's true. But I want to underscore to you where I'm coming from. I want to leverage the $60 billion. Maybe I wouldn't spend quite that much. I would certainly spend it differently. I would certainly rewrite the rules. And that's why policy matters, because the public policies that inform the way these dollars are spent and constrain and guide the way the money is spent determines what you get out the other end of the tubes, determines whether you're going to have higher standards of living or we're going to spend money fruitlessly. One problem, how many people had a chance to read chapter 3 of my book that was sent to you on the link, the chapter about this company called Fantas? Terrific. Bless you for reading a chapter of my book. But so you understand that there's this thing out there, these site location consultants, right, who play this prisoner's dilemma game, right? And the net effect of that is to distort the way public officials view the process and, frankly, to demean them. I believe that it's a demeaning system to public officials. It undermines their position It makes them play, the game with practically two hands tied behind their back. We're not well served by that. Frankly, also, I think the system causes people to misunderstand how the economy works. Remember, all state and local taxes combined as a cost of doing business for the average company in the United States of America come to 0.8%. Let me repeat that. All state and local taxes, 0.8% of a company's cost structure. That means 99.2% of their cost structure, labor, occupancy, energy, logistics, CEO and executive compensation, etc., are the things that really drive a company's cost structure, really determine where a company decides where to expand or locate. They are the business basics. If you're going to give a company a tax break, you're talking about shaving off some fraction of 0.8% of their cost structure. You just can't move the needle much when you do that. Another problem is we've got too much retail subsidization. It's a complicated explanation why that's true, but it is objectively true. We have several times, 6 to 8 times more square feet of retail space per capita in this country than any other developed nation in the world. Walmart's an example. They're up to $1.2 billion in bricks and mortar subsidies that we've identified. Cabela's and Bass Pro are not far behind the outdoor sporting goods stores. Cabela's especially is over about $500 million now, just for that one chain alone. Another problem we're skeptical of is the fact that most of these incentives don't do anything explicit to encourage environmentally responsible behavior by the companies that get them. There's a little bit of movement on this front, and we're about to do a study on that, but there's very little intentional carrots, if you will, in these programs to get companies to do things like use green building standards or to reduce their toxic emissions if they're an industrial workplace. Another problem is sprawl, and I'm going to show you some maps in a minute about that. We've firmly established, publishing more studies than any other organization in this country, that the geographic distribution of company-specific incentives is unabashedly pro-sprawl. We're also concerned that even though there's a lot of lip service to the contrary, if you read the fine print, the vast majority of economic development incentive programs don't do anything intentional to reduce poverty. They're not targeted to people who need help the most, and therefore they don't help people who need help the most. We're also very concerned that some subsidies are structured in ways that they really become kind of termites in public budgets. This is especially true of tax credits, corporate income tax credits, which are rarely, are very poorly understood. They don't get evaluated the same way that appropriations do. They're not the subject of budget hearings, right? You have a budget every year for a state or a city, and there's a hearing, right? And everybody agrees on X number of dollars for this budget line item and that budget line item. But tax expenditures don't get treated that way. That's not the way they occur. Nobody writes a check when a company claims a tax credit. They just claim that tax credit on their income tax return, which is secret and gets filed with your state revenue department. That's a problem. Because they harm budgets, they undermine funding for things that really do matter, things that we know really do help grow the economy. And at the top of that list would always be skills and infrastructure. And especially on the skills side, I'm very pleased that we're going to hear from a community college leader here, because community colleges and other educational institutions, especially for adult workers, are playing an incredibly important role now, enabling a lot of people who need help to get better skills, to get, when the economy improves, to be more efficient and productive and earn better standards of living. We're also very concerned that the system is biased against small companies. There's a big new study soon to come out from one of our collegial organizations looking at many states, including your own, finding a profound bias against companies that are small or locally owned. We know that in some of the programs they looked at, the ratios are extremely lopsided. So to give you an example of one study that was done in Eugene, Oregon, a program gave out a certain amount of money. 95% of the money went to just 6 big companies, and they were quite expensive company deals, $32,000 per job. On the other hand, small companies got just 5% of the money, and they were 16 times more effective, cost-effective at creating jobs. And obviously the risks were lower because the risks were spread over a greater number of companies. Finally, this is a little esoteric, but since you've read about site location consultants, you understand there are people in the middle of this process who make money on transactions. Site location consultants make money on transactions, and another even less visible industry, people who are the buyers and the brokers, if you will, of tax credits, like your Iowa film production tax credits, which have been so controversial here, right? Most of the companies that claim those credits can't use them. The credits are far more valuable than the money they would ever owe as income taxes, so they want to sell them to somebody. So there's a whole industry of brokers that make money matching buyers with sellers because the credits are salvable. So let's talk about land use for a minute. I want to show you 3 sets of maps here. This is Detroit, the metro area of Detroit. The red part of the area there is the city of Detroit itself. How many people have read a book called American Metropolitics by Myron Orfield? Has anybody read that book? These are his color codes. 2 hands in the room. Okay. So in this room, red and then orange are the most tax base impoverished parts of the region. And as you get into deeper blue, you get into tax base wealthy parts of the region. That is, places that have lots of property tax base and other tax base to pay for public services. Every yellow dot in this map is a plant closing or mass layoff, as officially notified under the federal 60-day plant closing WARN Act. So you can see Detroit and the inner ring suburbs really have the measles. That's where people are getting laid off the most. So you'd ask yourself the question, hopefully the state of Michigan is doing a lot to bring jobs back to those communities that are most hard hit by the plant closings, right? Well, you'd be wrong. Here's the state's most lavish incentive program. It's called MEGA, the Michigan Economic Growth Authority. 81 deals in the same period of time, 1 to the city of Detroit, 0 to the next 10 most densely populated inner ring suburbs of Detroit. And very poor public transportation service to many of the distant suburbs that got these new jobs. Over a long period of time, land consumption in the Detroit metro area has outpaced population growth 13-1. Another study we did looked at companies getting paid to move around. This is the Twin Cities metro area. At the heart of that map, on the left is Minneapolis, and on the right is St. Paul. Every arrow here is a company, 86 of them, that moved around, got paid to move, but stayed in the same labor market, didn't lay off anybody, kept the same workforce, but got a big tax break to move into an industrial park or something. Every blue arrow is outbound, and every red arrow is either sideways or inbound. 4 out of 5 are outbound, and many of them are more than 10 miles long. This is an 11-county metro area. It's a big piece of land you're talking about here. So and then we analyzed these movements. We said, so what's the impact on land use, and who are the winners and who are the losers, the communities that win and lose in this movement? One of the screens we did was transit. That is, what does this do for people that can't afford a car? Does it help them gain new job opportunities? And the answer is, it actually hurts them. So the red arrows, 27 of them, are companies that were accessible at the beginning of their move by public transportation, but when they landed up are not. And the orange arrows, 33 of them, were inaccessible and remained inaccessible, so that at the end of this process, more than 2/3 of these companies are creating new jobs only for people that own cars. And if you look at the demographics of who doesn't own a car in this country, there's a strong racial component to the carless families. Speaking of race, we also mapped 15 years of state of Illinois investments in the Chicago area. This is the 6-county metro area, and the thin line, so Cook County is the big central county there, and then the skinny line inside Cook County is the city of Chicago, and the sort of round bulb at the northwestern tip of Chicago is O'Hare Field, which Chicago annexed to itself. So 15 years of investments by the state of Illinois, and you'll notice that in census tracts with high concentrations of African American residents, those are the ones in orange and red, there's large swaths of the south side of the city of Chicago and its southern suburbs, and to a less degree on the west, where the state hasn't invested anything for 15 years. By contrast, if you could unpack all the little dots around O'Hare there, you discover that 1 out of 6 deals in that time period went to companies that located just right around the airport. It's called the O'Hare Northwest Corridor. Even though it's an extremely attractive area, it's the intersection of all the interstate freeways that feed the region. The airport's the second busiest airport in the country. Why would you pay anybody to go there? Finally, we're about to release a study in Ohio looking at Cleveland and Cincinnati, It's another relocation study. These are all companies that moved to get into enterprise zones. So again, blue is outbound, red is inbound, Cuyahoga County with Cleveland at its heart there on Lake Erie. Again, 4 out of 5 movements are outbound, and many of them very long distances. And then we juxtapose that with poverty. And the map sort of looks like an emergency evacuation plan from poverty. I don't really know how else to characterize it. And the same was true if you look at plant closings or mass transit or race. Job flight subsidized away from places that need it the most. What should we do about this? Well, at the top of our list is always disclosure. That is sunshine. Let everybody see who's getting the money, where the money's coming from, what the deal was worth, what the company said it was going to do with the money, and then how they're doing. Did they deliver on their promises, on their job creation and wages? Last time we looked, 26 states were already disclosing to some degree. We're reviewing that study now. I'm sure we'll find more states are doing some degree of online disclosure. This study is called the State of State Disclosure. It's on the handout I gave you. We certainly should be aware that we have a genuine transparency buff in the White House right now. In 2006, then Senator Obama co-sponsored a bill with the extremely conservative Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn, another example of this left-right business that Professor Gordon talked about, co-sponsored a bill that created a website called usaspending.gov. And usaspending.gov is really the mother of recovery.gov, which is the website that tracks Recovery Act spending. How many people have spent any time looking at the Recovery Act website, recovery.gov? A few people? Okay, good. You were like looking at your neighborhood or your industry? What were you looking at? Shout it out.
State of Iowa.
You're looking at your whole state? Okay. All right. So obviously we hooked up the lesson on the blackboard here. This is from his days teaching law at the University of Chicago. But there's an enormous appetite for traffic at that website. And the website is absolutely improving the performance of state governments. We've also rated the state Recovery Act websites twice, including your own here in Iowa. And they're getting better and better. And they're doing it in part because of Obama and the bipartisan consensus that exists around the importance of disclosure. Another remedy, job quality standards. That is, let's say to companies, and you do this to a few of your programs, like the Quality Jobs program here, that companies getting incentives must pay a certain wage and health care and full-time hours. Almost every state does it for at least one program. Many states and cities do it for several programs or for any deals worth more than a certain dollar per job. And you've heard the term living wage, which often applies to procurement, that is, private contractors performing public services. That same concept is now carried over in many cases to economic development incentives, that is, to companies not doing public services but getting economic development incentives. Clawbacks, that is, money-back guarantee language, saying to companies that if we'll give you a certain period of time to achieve your goals, job creation, capital investment. If you don't get there within a certain period of time, we're going to give you a haircut. You're going to pay the money back, or you're going to lose the benefit moving forward, or we're going to rewrite the value of the benefit, perhaps, to make it less lucrative because you delivered less than you promised. At the local level, there's a remedy called community benefits agreements, and these are really kind of a community organizing remedy to redevelopment fights that are often high profile. That is, holding up the granting of incentives. A coalition will come together and say to a developer, right now we oppose your project and we will oppose you getting your tax breaks in your TIF district or whatever it is you want until you agree to do some things that make sure that the people in the footprint of the project are really going to benefit. You're not going to gentrify this neighborhood and displace everybody. You're not going to bring in a bunch of traffic and make the neighborhood undesirable anymore. We're going to do things to buffer us from the benefits, the effects of the project. We're going to try to provide local hiring preferences, living wages, environmental easements or whatever to make the project easier to live next to. And then, if we can agree with you on those conditions, then we will support your request for the TIF district or whatever you're looking for. We're also pushing this idea of location efficiency. Obviously, this is the remedy, one of the remedies to the sprawl studies that I just showed you. That is, shame on us if we allow a company locating jobs in a metro area that has public transportation system. Shame on us if we don't insist that the jobs be on a transit corridor, that people who don't own a car can get to work, and frankly that Everybody should have a choice about how to get to work. We shouldn't force everybody to do everything in a car every day. There's a very convincing scholarship out now that says that even with more efficient automobiles, even with more efficient fuels, even with ethanol, etc., we're not going to reduce CO2 emissions from tailpipes in America until we give people choices about how to get around. And you don't do that unless you improve the built environment, unless you have smart growth and give people a choice about how to get to work. There's a lot of talk about green jobs. There's a whole green jobs section on your state website here, like there is in most states today. We're very nervous about that because a lot of the incentives being promoted for green jobs are just kind of larding on this system of states that already have 3 dozen or more incentives. And if you want to build a windmill plant in an industrial state like Iowa, it's going to go to heaven. It's not going to pay income taxes for many years. It's not going to pay property taxes. The wages are going to get subsidized. It's going to get cheap land and infrastructure. You can't do much for it. So our suggestion is let's put green strings on the existing incentives. Let's go back and raise the bar on our existing tax credits and our existing TIF districts and our existing revenue bonds and enterprise zones. And for big projects, let's even talk about carbon reduction plans. And of course, the public transportation accessibility as well. People know what LEED stands for, the U.S. Green Building Council LEED system for green buildings. Very cool system, usgbc.org. This is the extremely rapidly growing organization promoting green construction standards. They have 3 different grades of them, and it's really becoming the kind of currency for defining energy efficient buildings, right? 40% of greenhouse gases are emitted by buildings. It's the lowest hanging fruit there is out there for reducing greenhouse gas emissions is by improving the efficiency of our built environment as it exists today. So just to remind us, again, about why policy matters and the potential we see in the leveraging of incentives, the dormant power that's there. If we are intentional about policy, if we target incentives to people who need help the most, including dislocated workers today, if we make the system transparent so that people can advocate for fairness, if we can engage people in community benefits agreements and help them organize to reshape redevelopment projects to meet their needs, if we can get rid of the bias against small business and favor small businesses who create the most jobs and are most likely to stay and are the least likely to be footloose and run off, if we are intentional about using incentives to promote green buildings and public transit as a choice for getting to work, we can realize the potential, but only if we're intentional about policy. Thanks for your time, because we can use the recession as a restart button, or we can go back to business as usual. And you all have more self-interest than anybody else in this country right now in us using it as a reset button. Thanks.